Hello, Professor Olivetti here again. In this video, I would like to go over the instructions for writing the first paper. Now, this will be our most challenging paper in many ways because it is a research paper. So, if we look at the goal of the paper, the goal is to research and share what contemporary Bible scholars believe the literal senses of a short section of the book of Genesis is. So, we are going to be looking at what the people in this type of book have to say about what is written in this book. Right? So step one, we'll see. We're going to read this, and then we're going to see what these people say about it. And again, just to make things a little confusing, we also have a book like this, which has this book in it and some of this stuff too. Right? But the main goal of this paper is to research and share what the Bible scholars believe the literal sense of a short section in the book of Genesis in the Holy Bible is, right? Now, what is the literal sense? We're talking about the literal sense. We mean what the writers of the book wanted their original audience to understand. Now, this gets a little confusing sometimes, and you're going to have to, this is language particular to scriptural studies. When we say the literal sense, what do we mean? Probably we do not mean the same thing that we mean when we use the word literally in everyday language. Because if someone says to me something happened like it was raining cats and dogs, and I say literally, like was there actually cats and dogs falling from the sky, they would say no, not literally, figuratively. But in scriptural studies, when we say the literal sense, we don't mean what the words say exactly. We mean this: what the writers wanted their original audience to understand. Now, please read that, learn that, because if you don't understand that, you won't pass the paper. Okay? In other words, this paper is about what the people who wrote it, what they meant when they wrote it, what they wanted the people who they were writing it for to understand. Not word for word what it says. No, that's not what we mean. We're talking about the literal sense. We mean what the people who wrote it, what they meant, what they wanted their audience to understand. So that is step one, understanding what the literal sense means. The other important thing to understand about the goal of this paper is not about what you think Genesis means. We'll get to that later. You'll have room for that for your what we call a spiritual interpretation, where you are inspired to bring out a helpful meaning for you and the people of your world through the Bible text. But the literal sense is about what they meant, right? Not what I read, not what I interpret, not the way I take it, but what we're trying to understand, what the authors, the people who formed these stories, what they meant when they were telling them, retelling them, and writing them down. Clear enough? Okay, so please, the literal sense. You have to understand what that means to write this paper. Okay, so let's get started with the steps. Step number one, read the book of Genesis, chapters 1 through 4 in the Bible. Again, we're not here. Don't read it here. No, this will not give you Genesis 1 to 4, the Bible story. This will give you scholars' ideas, well-researched opinions about what it means. You want to read it in here. right? The Holy Bible, chapters 1 to 4. Again, if you're using this book, it's in there. It starts around page 600. Or you go online, right? BibleGateway.com. Type in Genesis 1. Click to the NAB in the drop-down. NABRE, sorry. And get reading. All right, that's step number 1. Now, there's a little bit of information here about biblical notations. For example, when you're looking for the book of Genesis, it's probably just called, it could be abbreviated GEN. Chapters and verses are listed after the name of the book. So Genesis 2:8, you're talking about Genesis chapter 2, verse 8, right? And we can also put sections. For example, Genesis chapter 2, verse 18 to 24 would look like that with a dash. Or you could even go from one chapter to the next. If you have something like Genesis 1:26 to 2:1, that means you read from chapter 1, verse 26 of Genesis, all the way to the end of chapter 1 and start reading chapter 2, including the first verse. So just to make sure you're in the right place, Genesis chapter 1 is going to read chapter 1, verse 1, the very beginning of the first book in the Holy Bible. It's going to begin in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth. Okay. So again, here's a little, I'm talking about here, make sure you're reading the right thing, the Bible, not the Bible commentary. And here is your little link to BibleGateway.com, which is one of many good sources for reading the actual Bible text, right? So please, I hope you can see in this instructions, which are posted in the paper number 1 module, I give you very specific and succinct instructions on how to write this paper. Make sure that you use these. Don't just sit down and start writing anything, right? Follow these steps, step by step. That way I'll be able to give you a nice high grade. Step 2, select a topic. Now look at how short these are. You're gonna have a short section, just part of chapter 1. Look at this one, it's only 5 verses. Look at this one, 4 verses. Or better yet, 3 verses, okay? Now don't think, oh, the shortest one is gonna be the easiest. A lot of times it's the other way around, because you might be able to find more information in the longer ones, right? But again, it depends. Some of these topics are very crucial for understanding what the authors meant. So even though it's a short section, you might find a lot of information in the commentaries, right? But you can see they're focusing here on chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Genesis. Oh, and 4. So after you read the stories, right? So read chapters 1 to 4. Of the book of Genesis. They want you to understand kind of the way the narrative flows. You're actually getting 3 separate stories here. There's a creation story in chapter 1. There's a creation story in chapter 2 and 3 that involves the origin of evil in the world and sin in the world. And then there's a story in chapter 4 about the way that sin is going to be proliferated, or the way that it continues into the second generation. So after you have read Genesis 1 to 4 and selected one of these short sections, it's going to be time for you to go to the commentaries. And so on the instructions, I have a list of commentaries, and most of these I will also have posted in the Paper 1 submodule for those of you who do not have access to the Mount Library at this time. So you want to then go to these commentaries and look for the places where the commentaries are talking about these specific verses that you're writing, that you've chosen as your topic, and read what they say. You might want to change your selection based on what is written in the commentaries, because something might be more interesting to you, or you might say that there's information on one that seems more relevant. Also, don't limit yourself just to reading the sections on those verses, but read the introductions to the book of Genesis, the general information on Genesis in these commentaries, because that will help you understand who wrote the books and what they meant. Step number 4 is when we actually get to writing. So again, what are you writing about? You're not rewriting the story. Anybody who wants to read the story can read it in the book of Genesis, in the Bible. I know the story already. I don't need you to tell me the story. What I need to tell you to tell me is what the authors of the commentaries say that story meant. Right? So that part of the story that you're focusing on, tell me what they think the people who formed, edited, and wrote down this story thousands of years ago, what they meant. Okay, so let's go through the steps. Now, step number 1 really shouldn't be done right away. I put it as step number 1 for the sake of organizing. But really, the thesis and the conclusion, right, which should be identical. They should be the same. You should make the same statement at the beginning of your paper, repeat that same statement at the end of your paper. Should tell me what the literal sense means, what it is, a definition of it, and then what the literal sense of the passage that you're focusing on says. So, for example, a nice thesis and conclusion, right? This could open your paper and be the last statement in your paper. It would be something like, the literal sense of Scripture refers to what the authors of the Bible wanted their audience to understand. Okay? Again, you're explaining to the reader, hey, this is what the literal sense is. This is what I'm writing about. And then I want you to tell me what it was. So the authors of Genesis, and then you would put in whatever verses that you have chosen from this list up here. So, for example, you might say, the authors of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 1-3. Wanted their audience to understand that. I'm not going to tell you the answer here, but whatever it is that they wanted them to understand. Now, this thesis, right, should summarize the other things you have in your paper. There has to be agreement between your thesis and what's in your paper. And so that sometimes it's best to write your paper first so you can see all the information you have, and then go back and write your thesis and conclusion, which is a summary of what that's going to be. Okay. So as I already mentioned, don't include a summary of the Bible story in this paper. I know the Bible story. Anybody who wants to know the Bible story can just read it straight out of the Bible. You don't need to summarize the story. Okay? Please don't. Another thing you want to do is to identify the authors. Who were the people that wrote this story down? Who were the first people to write it down in the form that we have it now in the Bible? And it's going to be one of these following two groups, either the Yahwist writers, which is called J, because in German, Yahwist starts with a J, and they were the Germans were the first people to really develop this form of biblical scholarship, or the priestly writers, which is just abbreviated P. This one of those two groups wrote all three of these stories that you can choose from to focus on in your paper. So again, it's important to not only read the sections of the commentaries on your specific verses, but also the introductions to Genesis in the commentaries, and if you have it, your Catholic Study Bible. Very helpful. All right. I've already said this, but I'm going to repeat it again here. Do not include your personal interpretation of the Bible story in this paper, right? Now, write what the experts say about the topic in the biblical commentaries, right? People wrote these a long time ago, right? So to understand what the people in the ancient Near East were thinking 2.5 or 3,000 years ago, you're going to have to be an expert. These people spend their whole lives looking at research, right? Hearing theories, analyzing the text, doing all this, what we call biblical exegesis, to try to get into the mind of the people who wrote it, to try to understand the context in what they wrote it in. You know, people do archaeology and dig up these old settlements and understand what life was like for the people in them. It's a field of an expert, okay? Someone who has devoted many, many years to it. It takes a long time to be able to gather enough information to understand what these people actually meant. And that's what we're looking at. Since we're looking at what the people who wrote it meant, we're going to need the help of the experts, okay? This is not the paper for your personal interpretation. That will come later. You will have a chance to do that in a subsequent paper, okay? But leave it out of this one. You will have to use in-text citations or footnotes in this text, in this paper, every time you write an idea from the commentaries, or even if you're quoting words out of the Bible itself, you'll have to do it, okay? So I did include a short explanation about how to cite the different sources, right? Like how to cite the Bible itself. You put the abbreviation for the book, the chapter and verses, and then the version you're using, okay? Here's one that's using a larger segment where it's going from part of one chapter to part of another one. The biblical commentaries, you have a little bit of choice there. You can either use the name of the author who wrote the section of the commentary, or you can use the name or the abbreviation for the commentary itself. See, so JBC would probably be the easiest way to do it. Right? Now be careful, because the person who edited the commentary is usually not the person who wrote the actual article on that book of the Bible or that part of the book of the Bible. So sometimes people want to use the editors, and that's actually just more confusing. You're really supposed to please use the name of the author of the section, or if you want to play it safe, you can always just use the name of the book, right? Or here, the abbreviation of the book, JBC, right? The study Bible, of course, is kind of the most confusing because you have both the biblical text and the commentaries right in it, but you quote it the same way. You either quote you cite it the same way. You either use the name of the author of that section of commentary, or you can just use the name of the book itself, Catholic Study Bible, right? Then the page number. You do have to use you have to cite at least 2 of the biblical commentaries in your text and include a full bibliography, right? All the books that you used, even if you didn't cite them directly. Okay, so you're done, right? Wrong. And this is the biggest thing that gets students is that, they get, it's the night before. I got a full 12 hours if I don't sleep to write this paper. I know. I went to college too, all right? I was an undergrad once. But guess what? I didn't write good papers that way, right? If you want to earn a high grade on this paper, you will have to go through all these steps, give yourself lots of time to do it, and then also give yourself time for this. Edit and revise. Okay? Nobody writes a good paper on one draft. I mean, maybe some, big time pros, I've heard of people like this that can just write these great edits on one draft. They're few and far between, and probably been writing papers for many years. For the rest of us, it's going to take several rounds of editing and revisions. Okay? Please don't turn in work that looks like the first draft. It makes it less likely that you're handing in quality work. It makes it harder for the goal of the paper to be reached. And especially when it comes to grammar and language, it can really make a big difference on whether you're actually reaching the goals of the paper or not. For example, if a student forgets a not, right? If you miss that word, you may end up saying the opposite of what you meant to say. And I have to grade the paper on what is there. So please, the grammar and the language of the paper, it should help clarify the ideas. It shouldn't make them more confusing. When I read your paper, I shouldn't be like, did they mean this or did they mean that? I can't tell because their grammar is incorrect, right? Now, why would your grammar be incorrect? Well, obviously you didn't take time to revise and edit the paper, right? So good editing and revisions of your paper will make it that anyone can pick up your paper, right? Anyone who has decent reading skills should be able to pick up your paper and read it and understand what it means. It shouldn't be confusing. They shouldn't have questions about what you meant when you wrote a certain sentence. So some suggestions. Well, number one, go over your paper, right? Read it through, right? Check it for spelling errors, grammatical errors, and typing mistakes, right? When people don't do that, it shows. The other thing you want to do is read it out loud, right? Do the words that are on the paper, is that what you meant to write? Because a lot of times people can think one thing and then they're in a hurry or something and they write and they don't write that. You say, oh, well, the reader will figure it out. No, they probably won't. So it's a great idea just to just slowly read it word for word out loud, probably to someone else, see if it makes sense to them, but especially does it make sense to you? Is that what you meant? And then please don't be afraid to get help. Have a good writer read your paper and tell you, oh, this made sense, this didn't make sense. I think, are you going for this? I'm not sure. Is this what you mean? Because that's not because I don't understand what you meant there, right? Or maybe if you even made some structures, some different edits to the format, maybe it would make it easier to read. Like your sentences aren't so long, or the paragraphs are shorter, or your ideas are more specific to each paragraph. Okay. I gave you very specific instructions for this paper, so use them. Okay. And finally, use the Writing Center. You've got this free service to edit your papers. All you have to do is just have them done a little bit ahead of, a few days, a week ahead of time. Bring the Writing Center. They're going to help you edit it and revise it, and bam, you're going to have some great papers. Okay. It's a free service that the university offers you. Okay. So please take advantage of that. That's going to make a big difference in your work. Here's a grading rubric based on what's in the instructions of the paper, right? Format. I want the clear thesis. Give me that thesis inclusion statement. And make sure the thesis and inclusion statement is about the literal sense of Scripture. Make sure I, the reader, will know that you know what the literal sense is. In general, and also in this particular paper. Also then for format, use appropriate citations and footnotes. Okay. have a properly formed biography, right? Content is the most important thing. You got 50 points here. Remain focused on what the writers of the commentaries write. Don't go off into speculation. Okay. Now, if you write about what the commentaries write about one of the specific verses and topics, and then you want to comment on the commentaries, you want to put in your own idea, like, oh, well, I really like this one, and I think this one might be more accurate than that one. If you want to compare two of them or something like that, right? Just make sure if you're going to do that, you do it rationally, right? You're not putting your own ideas on top of what they said. You're just taking what they actually said. You can reflect on a little, right? You can comment on the commentaries if you want, but don't throw your own interpretation in there and say, this is what the author of Genesis said. That's not what we're looking for here. We're looking for the research from the experts, because you have to be an expert to understand, to really be able to rationally deduce what those people meant way back then. Okay. So that goes into number 2. It does not include personal reflections on the topic and verses in Genesis, right? And then also important for the content, that it shows that you know the difference between the book of Genesis in the Bible and the commentaries, reflections, or interpretations of it. Okay. This is what I was talking about before, that you're demonstrating a clear understanding of what the experts say the stories in Genesis mean. Okay. Now, again, you can include reflections on the commentaries, on the ideas of the experts, but not your own personal interpretation of the text at this time. Okay. That, again, will be a later paper. And then finally, 25 points for styling and editing. Clear grammar, easy to read. Like I said before, your words should make your ideas easy to understand. They shouldn't make them confusing or obscure the intention of your writing. Anybody should be able to pick it up and read it. Anybody with basic reading skills, they should be able to understand your rational progression. And again, then it should look like it's well reviewed and edited. Okay. And might I just add, as an extension of this remaining focus under content. So I'm going to add here in the content section about remaining focused. Important, right, that the content of the paper matches the thesis, right? Or probably easier said this way, thesis matches the content of the paper. Sometimes students will form a thesis and then they'll write about something different, and they won't include what they wrote in their paper in the thesis or conclusion. No, those have to match. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to add. Okay. So again, this is all there in the submodule. All the instructions to write the paper. Take your time. Write a great paper. All right. Get a lot of points. All right. Okay. Again, if there's any questions, please text me or email me. I'll get back to you as soon as I can.